All right, so thanks for joining me, everyone. Today we are going to be playing with Dr. Patrick Lockwood's perspective. So I am bad at introductions, so I always want to throw this to you. If I don't know how you would want to introduce yourself, whether that's what you do, what your titles are, who you are, just give people something to get to know you.
Sure. Yeah. And thanks for letting me come chat. I think this will be fun. And who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, for people who've not heard me on other podcasts, etc., my name is Patrick Lockwood. I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of California. I think my various types of introductory things include I'm a professor at California Lutheran University. I teach future doctors and therapists. I also teach um, little seminars here and there as needed, continuing education kinds of things sometimes. And then I'm also a business consultant, and so I do kind of whatever is required of me. I'm kind of the person you hire when your business is not doing so well and your team doesn't know how to deal with each other. So in the consulting world, I deal with leadership who struggle to be leaders. I deal with hiring and firing people because both of those activities are challenging for a lot of people, reading people effectively and judging their fit for their environment. What else do I do? I also have the tiniest private practice where occasionally,
Wait, how tiny are we talking about?
I mean, between 0 and 1 at this current moment. I
Okay.
couldn't even tell you, honestly, if that I deal with very very high conflict families and couples, so I'm
Okay.
basically a hostage negotiator, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Sure.
And so like between that and I also have like a little group practice I've started with a colleague where I supervise some interns as well, and so I kind of do clinical supervision for a living, uh, occasionally clinical work, and most of my life is professing and consulting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, there one thing you said that I wanted to actually get your thoughts on, and something I think you were tweeting about last night. Of part of your job description there was making sure people are the right fit for the job, and it's something you were talking
Yeah.
about as therapist. Are we the right fit for our job? And wanted to kind of get your thoughts of, I think you and I probably agree on a lot that there are a lot of problems within the field, and so a lot of that problem has to do with fit. Who are the
Yeah.
people that are attracted to this type of profession?
Yeah.
And the maybe limited gatekeeping mechanisms that are there to prevent people that do not have the appropriate fit out.
Yeah, the gatekeeping thing is always an interesting conversation because it really depends upon what your goal is, right? So if
Mm,
your goal is just to, fill up the profession with people or keep your graduate program full, then your gatekeeping mechanisms and standards will start to change drastically. At my program, I feel very lucky because all the people that sit on the interview committees are trustworthy psychologists, at least in my experience. And so when they're reading their personal statements, and I've done it at least once in my career with them so far, I feel good about the quality of the people that we bring into this ID program and the
mm,
MFT program. So I think the gatekeeping problem comes down to not only what your goal is for the institution, because for many of these institutions nowadays, it's just money. It's quite
sure.
literally just because most universities are not having the enrollments they need to keep things afloat. So what they do
Mm,
is they steal from other departments in order to keep, you know, if fine arts isn't doing well, they'll steal from engineering or math or clinical psychology, believe it or not. Like my department at my university brings in a great deal of money, and deservedly so, in my opinion. But most of that is not most of that. A large chunk of that is being subdivided and sent out to other departments who can't pay their bills, which happens in all businesses, especially universities nowadays. And so I think there's more pressure from the provost and all these other
hmm.
kinds of people to take in more students, um, because they just want to have more cash flow, honestly.
It's
And
so interesting, like the idea of like what is your goal of this. So just a random side note, my wife 2 days ago just passed her social work like clinical examination, and so
awesome.
congratulations to her. I'm very excited for her. But at the same
Yeah.
time, we were joking around of how ridiculous this test was. It
Oh,
does
yeah.
not test to see whether you are a clinically competent person. It tests
Yeah.
if you do you know how to read vocabulary, It's testing on some very bizarre things that you wouldn't never be doing clinically. And so it is such a bad marker for like, oh, does this person have the skills necessary to do this? It's well, there's a whole system and a bureaucracy around this that you get to pay the body. I think it's $230 to apply for the test, another $230 once you pass the test to get your license. And it seems to be failing to do, at least in my head, what the goal should be is, oh, like we're training and then this is this gatekeeping mechanism that we were talking about to prevent
Mhm.
people that don't have the skills. And the test has become easier and easier. So her test had only three multiple choice options, mine had four. And you just think of like these processes have happened over and over time just to get more people within the field as opposed to me, it seems like we need a bit of a push in the opposite direction to say, no, we need to actually limit this because I mean, I think you and I both agree on that. There's a lot of harm being done, and it's very not harm, just wasted money and time, which I think is harm,
Yeah.
by people that are in the field that don't either there for the right reason or are just not don't have the skills necessary to do what I think is a very very hard job to do it well.
Yeah, I would agree with most of that. I think, my one of my points of disagreement is, it depends upon what level of licensure too, because clinical psychologists, although in some ways not terribly better, depending upon which program, but our licensure process is a little more absurd than yours. And so, the EPPP is our national licensure exam, which is extremely long. And the multiple choice questions are not only reading comprehension questions, but they're also, I think, at least half of them are facts that are very important for what we do as psychologists.
Yeah,
So I think, many licensure exams will be critical thinking tests. And so it is weeding out people who don't know how to use critical thinking. So I think that is useful. I think you have to pass an ethics exam in most states and your licensure exam for content.
mm,
So, there's two layers there. Another layer to getting licensed for people who don't know is you usually have to have somewhere north of 3,000 hours of supervised professional
yeah,
experience under under someone else's license. And so usually that's across multiple settings. So you have multiple eyes on you getting your hours before you actually get licensed. So there are fail safes, there are screening and gatekeeping things that exist in the profession. But I think what you and I are talking about both on Twitter and today is, you know, how quality are those
yes,
gatekeeping mechanisms and what are they actually screening out for? So the tests themselves are screening out for critical thinking, reading comprehension, and basically endurance. Are you willing to bust your ass to actually do the things you need to do to study enough to remember enough? And so, will you work hard is another kind of metric. Maybe that's trait conscientiousness or
sure,
something like that. But then I think, somewhat separately and differently, I think when we talk about supervised professional experience, where you're under someone's license for 3,000 hours or 2.5, 3 years, that's a different story. And that's where there's insane amounts of variability. I would say it's so unpredictable what settings you'll work in to get your hours to get licensed, how quality your supervisors are, how much they give a shit. I can speak to at least Southern California where people get their hours in all sorts of settings. In some
yeah,
settings your supervisor doesn't care, they're just a signature, they're literally just a person with a license, because the treatment program you work for needs you to be the cheaply paid labor or cheaper labor to do the therapy and the notes and the documentation for insurance. And so your supervisor never even really meets with you in some situations. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you have people, I think, like myself. And so, not to be braggadocious or anything, but I take supervision very seriously.
yep,
I don't try to cut out on it, I don't try to half ass it. And I also don't shy away from very important things that should be talked about. So, with my interns, I currently have three right now across two different settings. And like, at all points are we talking about what really matters? In my opinion, we're talking about countertransference and transference. We're talking about, how do you fit in the system that you're currently a part of, and what role and what game are you stuck in psychologically, if you think of like the Milan School of Family Therapy. So I'm looking at the macro and the micro. I'm looking at patient dynamics, but I'm also looking at intern dynamics. Like, how are you showing up in the room? Why do you care about this thing? Why are you choosing this intervention? Ethically speaking, what are we doing here? What's our job? What's not our job? And so there's, I think, a giant and wide spectrum of people who do clinical supervision, and some really give a shit and try very hard to make sure you're helping people become the best version of themselves as a clinician and do professional development and ethics and intervention management and countertransference management and all these things. And then you've got, paid people who just love to sit there and collect money and sign off on their hours when they're done and sign off on their notes once a week. And
Yeah.
I think that is a shame. And I think legally a crime, but
Well, it goes into this weird thing where it's, I similarly feel very similar about supervision. I went and became a supervisor because I took me 5 years, and I was working the entire time, but I went through 5 years
mhm.
and 11 different supervisors before I was able to
Ooh,
accrue the amount of hours necessary. Because you get these people where they're, well, I'm busy, and I'm going to reschedule you as the supervisee, and there's a odd power dynamic as a supervisee. You don't want to be bothering this person that
yeah,
usually is above you in the hierarchy, and
yeah.
then you have this weird situation. You're mixing administrative supervision and clinical supervision very often in
Oh,
these
yeah.
situations, and trying to think of, I'm always like, what is it that motivated you to do supervision the way you do, and maybe the way that I did, and how do you incentivize more people to do that? Because it's, I think it's a bit more challenging. I find it rewarding, but a lot of my supervision is, hey, supervisee, what are you doing that is maybe not great to influence this, or what could you do differently, as opposed to just fixating on external resources or like just problems that you're having. It is, as you're saying, like the counter transfer. The real, to me, the importance is like, what are you bringing to the table? And what do you need to maybe do differently?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we could all do differently or better as people who've been in the profession longer, even if it's like 2 to 4 years, even if you're still newer, but you're out of the woods and you're doing your own thing, is I think like you have to remember what your values are as a person. And and I'm not saying people should think and function like me because that's absurd. I just, for me at least, the reason that I started this business with one of my former interns, who's now a licensed therapist who's crushing it, where she and I are both supervising people in a little group practice and making some good money off of them, but also giving them good supervision in return, right? Like she and I started that because she appreciated her experiences with me as a supervisor. And she likewise had very similar comments and concerns that you and I are
Yeah.
discussing about the industry and the quality of things. And so she kind of, obviously we want to make money. No question, no shame,
Nope.
no
Should
no
be.
waffling about it. It's the fact. We would love to make money off of these interns, and we currently are. And that is a motivating force. And on the pro social side of this, we both are fed up with the quality of the people that we see graduate schools turning out. And if we can make life better for these interns and help them become better clinicians and better colleagues out in the field, then we're kind of like the little pebble in the pond. We're not the big pebble in the pond. We're not a meteorite or some shit like that. We're just like doing our part to influence the next generation of people so they're less screwed up and more useful and better colleagues to their colleagues, right? So I think you have to find people who are at least interested in helping the profession change. I think that's one thing we should
Hmm.
all be doing
Yeah.
if we're interested. Because, like, how I was raised, this is a personal thing. How I was raised is you're supposed to be giving back to the community in some way. You're supposed to be doing something that's actually beneficial for the world outside of yourself. And so I've tried to create a consulting business and this private group practice with my former intern so that we can actually be doing something to make the world outside of us better,
Yeah.
not just our bank account, right? Because there's plenty of bank account stuff I can do that requires no overhead, no cost to myself, no risk to my license. So having a bunch of interns is actually a risk to my license because who knows what they could do and so on and so forth, right? And so these are moderately high risk things that require some sacrifice, even though there's a lot of upside for myself and the intern.
Well, and what strikes me in this conversation, which I think is missing in a lot of others in the profession, is this admission that you make of like, I want to make money.
Yeah.
This is my profession. This is how I support my family. Part of what I'm doing right now by talking to you is taking time out of my Saturday to promote myself, and hopefully that's part of what you're doing as well. Is like this is our attempts to gain influence, money, and power, and that you can actually align these things with good things. It doesn't have to be a just make money. It is, but I think you first have to acknowledge that part of what we're doing, and something that I've seen you talk a lot about on Twitter, is we are getting stuff for ourselves out of this. And I think it is
Mm,
so, so important to acknowledge what it is that I am essentially taking from this profession. And can I align that with what I think are my values are to increase, good and to contribute to society, as you had mentioned. But so often it is difficult. And we have, I think, people in the profession who are a bit naive about their own self-interested aspect of why they joined into this field or why they're doing what they're doing.
yeah, I think there's a lot of people who genuinely want to think of themselves. I don't think it's like, how would you say it? I don't think it's fake. I think there are a great many people
Mhm.
in the profession who genuinely would like to see themselves as more nice or loving
Of
or
course.
giving or whatever it is. And they would like to downplay the personal benefits and the selfishness of it all because I think that they have a really bad relationship with, their shadow, whatever. They just have a bad
Yeah.
relationship with themselves, in my opinion. And I think that there's a large chunk of people who are rather unaware of their motives, or they're mildly aware of their motives. And that's because they haven't had good supervision or good personal therapy to be more clear about their need for attention, their need to be special, their need to be important. I was tweeting about this last night and I'm getting some likes but very few comments. But, people are understanding what I'm saying about narcissism,
Yep.
right? Like there are a great many people in specifically the helping professions, doctors, nurses, therapists, psychologists, whatever, who are rather narcissistic. And I said this yesterday, so I want to walk this out for everyone in case
Please,
they
please.
catch it. Like the word narcissism has a lot of bad press, obviously. And so there's ordinary narcissism. All of us need some degree on a spectrum, some level of like, I matter no matter what, and I'm important, and I'm special, and I want attention, right? All three of those things are ordinary, especially if they're around like the middle of the normal curve for most people. Now, depending upon your genetics and all this stuff, maybe you score higher or lower on trait narcissism, et cetera, et cetera. But our friends in the helping professions usually are in between 1 and 2 standard deviations higher on trait narcissism, and they usually cannot see it or do not want to see it. So I'm not talking about ordinary, look at me, I want attention, I want to be special and powerful and things like that. I'm talking about borderline unusual or problematic or even very problematic. I want to be special, I want attention, I want to be powerful, etc. And so that relatively speaking unhealthy narcissism I think is a large part of what drives people to the profession, number 1, but it also drives them to stay unaware, number 2, of their selfish motivations for doing things. And so, full transparency, I would say one of the major differences between the kinds of people I'm describing in myself is I'm just much more aware of these things and more at peace with the differences that I have. And so I try to do, relatively speaking, pro social things
Mhm.
and not screw people over or hurt people. That's the real substantive difference. I'm not saying that I'm especially not narcissistic. In fact, I would be willing to say that I'm around that second standard deviation on the grandiose side of things because I love attention. I love
Mhm.
talking. So I'm a professor and I have a podcast and I have people staring at me and needing things from me and listening to me.
Yep.
I like attention and I have zero shame about that. The question just becomes, am I finding a relatively adaptive way of handling it? And am I doing it in such a way that's not really hurting me and not really hurting the people around me? Is it mostly benefiting people more than it's potentially harming people? Is the rubric I have in my head. And I think a lot of these therapists are actually really unaware of their exhibitionistic self needs, if we're going to be super technical about it.
Yep.
Like that need to be seen and to be admired is not entirely pathological. In some cases, it's at the very pathological end of the spectrum. But for many of these clinicians, it's like 50th, 60th, 70th percentile. They don't see it, and then they've sublimated it. They've shoved it into a compartment where they get special attention from patients, and patients quote unquote need them, and they don't realize that that's where their exhibitionistic self is being buried.
Mhm.
They're hiding in private practice when secretly they want more attention in life.
It,
You know?
one of the things that like I really enjoy about you and what I think separates this thing is that at least my observation of you is you have seem to have very little shame. At least you don't seem to experience that, like a lot of that, and that's what often I see is within these types of clinicians. If you have
Mhm.
a professional disagreement, it'll often go to a very personal place very quickly. And to me, what
Yeah.
I am observing is you think you have this idea and you often get a lot of positive attention for it. And me, I'm annoying and disagreeable, and I'll be like, hey, I might not agree with this like one little thing here. In this, I sometimes will feel like an avalanche of aggression towards me, and I'm like, whoa, like where is this coming from? I don't see it this way. I still like you. I still appreciate you
Yeah.
as a person. And
Yeah.
I've always tried to like, what is happening here? Because it seems that there's some shame to me seems to be this word within narcissism, especially that is this thing that, if you can just deal with that a little better, so much of these, you can just accept that, oh, I have these needs. I love going on Twitter and interacting with certain people. I'll make a joke specifically because I want Dr. Patrick Lockwood's attention because it
Yeah.
feels good to me because I think you're someone that's funny. I enjoy interacting with you, and I'm just aware of this. And there's
Yeah.
no to me. I don't feel shame about that. It's just like a natural thing. I want to connect with another person that thinks similar to me, has a similar seemingly sense of humor. There's nothing pathological about this, but for me then to deny that, I could be quite destructive. And you can see how that goes down a bad path as soon as you start denying these seemingly very natural and healthy impulses.
Yeah, and I think shame is a big problem, right? Because I think in graduate school in particular, I think a lot of professors, I don't know because I only know my little microcosm here in Southern California. However, I think just based upon my very limited niche convenience sample life,
Mm,
I would say there are many people who really want you to disavow pieces of yourself in the profession for the sake of so-called professionalism. I think professionalism is one of the most toxic and disgusting words. Not that I think there's no space for that
sure.
conversation. I think that conversation is exactly what you and I are talking about. What I mean is there's the corporatist, compliance based version of professionalism. And, you know, I grew up in a world full of AA, right? So, like,
Okay.
this is going to seem like a bit of a non sequitur, but just
Sure.
for a couple of seconds. So the types of AA people that I grew up, the recovery folks that I grew up with, they always had this that AA has tons of slogans and catchphrases, but the one that's always stood out to me as a kid, but as an adult in the clinical world, in the rehab world, is it's a program of attraction, not promotion. So you're not selling yourself. You're not forcing people to care about what you do in recovery. You're just trying to live the principles of recovery such that more people are interested
Mm,
and they like the way you handle your recovery, your relationship with your higher power, your relationship with the steps and the principles and the traditions. And so you're a more appealing version of recovery compared to other people in the room or other
hmm.
meetings. And so I think of that when I think of professionalism. Could we create an environment on campuses, in graduate schools, in treatment centers where people get their hours, in clinics like the one that I run, you know, in your private practice, in your group practice, at these, small organizations, right? Can we create a program of attraction, not a program of promotion, right? Like all the interns that I work with me because they've had direct experience with me and they're like, fuck, I want to work with that
Yeah.
guy. I want him to be my supervisor because as crazy as he is, and they're aware of it,
Yeah.
but as crazy as he is, he's going to help me see things that I can't see. He's going to help me see things in myself that I'm afraid to see, and he's going to allow me to feel comfortable leaning into the mess of myself I'm going to give them permission. I'm excellent at giving people permission.
Mm,
I'm a little rough around the edges, obviously, but I give people all the freedom and the latitude in the world and a lot of non judgment, a lot of grace. And so that is promotion is sick and disgusting and toxic. And that's what a lot of professionalism is nowadays in grad schools. But attraction, just living a life that people think is interesting and valuable and useful, I think attraction is what we need to get back to, in my
that's
opinion.
that's such an interesting way of like conceptualizing it. I totally agree. But I think I see myself as a very similar supervisor. Like I'm just a little weird. I'm gonna do things a little differently, but I've always had the same feedback, which is it's really appreciated because I think me being open of like, hey, I do things a little differently, I'm a little strange. It gives your supervisee also the latitude to grow into themselves. Because I don't think, as we probably both agree, like you can't, there's no manual. You have to
Yeah.
figure this out on your own. Whenever supervisors are like, well, what would you do in this situation? I'm like, you can't do what I can do. I am me
Right.
and you are you. I can get away with some crazy joke because that's how I am. And I have a certain
Mm,
relationship with the person I'm talking to. You
mm.
should not say this to your client. Absolutely not.
Oh, yeah.
You have to
100%.
figure out your own joke, your own style, and all of these things. And so much of
Yeah.
it is very challenging. I think, as you had mentioned, within the graduate programs, you are essentially taught to be this stoic, non-emotional, buttoned-up person, and I don't think it's very effective. And it scares the
Which
shit
promotes
out of
shame.
people. It scares the
It
shit out of
promotes
me.
shame.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where the shame comes from. That's what I was
Yep.
talking about. I
Yep.
think that's literally where shame comes from for people is like, you might be kind of sick or kind of weird or kind of personality disordered
Mm,
getting into your grad program. And fair enough, you should probably handle that and have a better relationship with that. And at the
sure.
same time, I think I think of it like an ecosystem. I think there's different types of professionals with different types of personalities and backgrounds and cultures. So I actually love diversity. Unlike other people in the profession,
Yeah, I
I
love real
really
diversity. Yeah, I'm
I
with you.
love diversity. I love diversity of personality
Yeah.
styles and organizations. I like histrionic types. I like masochistic types. I like all the types. And I want them all to be in the profession doing unique things and seeing different types of patients because I know for a fact that there's no way I could sit with so many different types of people, which is why I basically rolled up my private practice.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm aware of my limitations as a person. I'm aware of the types of people I generally do well with and I'm very helpful with, but I also am aware of my limitations. So I try to do what's ethical and kind of live in my little box of my sphere of influence. But I also want a bunch of other people who are very different than me out there doing the work
Mm.
and living their best life doing the work as their unique, different, messy, or sometimes not messy self. Like one of my interns right now is about as obsessive compulsive as it gets.
Okay.
And I love her to death, and she's amazing. And she doesn't quite rise to the level of OCPD, perhaps, but because I don't diagnose
Sure, sure,
friends
sure.
and interns and shit, but like she's definitely organized that way. And
Yeah.
I love that.
Mm.
And she's going to go out there in the world and be a great therapist for a bunch of different types of people that I could never be a therapist for. And I'm aware of that. And so graduate school, if I think grad programs were more interested in play, in like the
Mm.
Donald Winnicott version of play, in the sense that professionalism is not about compliance with standards. It's more about playing in transitional spaces around your professional development needs, right? That's what I like to think of it as. I don't like to think of it as, are you being a good boy and answering every question in class or some stuff like that? I think of it like, are you actually in the play space? Are you trying to like explore and negotiate boundaries as a developing professional so that you can get better at what you want to get better at and also, for standards purposes, achieve benchmarks and all these things? That's what I think.
And I couldn't agree with you more. It's one of the reasons I they called whatever this is that I'm doing is like playing with perspective. Is there is just we take ourselves way too fucking seriously with just about
Yeah,
everything in life, and like we should
yeah,
be. And these are
I know.
deadly serious topics. Like don't get me wrong. Like you work in addictions. We're working with people that are suicidal. We're working with very serious conditions. But you can play in that space, and I think it
Yeah,
is so beneficial to do this. And we have lost sight of that. You can have fun like
yeah,
to me, supervision, when I go in and I'm doing supervision with someone, I am just fucking around for the most part. I'm doing the thing that is coming up on my mind. It is spontaneous. It has all the elements of what kids do when they're playing, but
Mm,
we're directed towards a very specific thing. But you can do it in fun, and at least my observations, people learn better in those environments. It's There's not the pressure that, oh, I'm gonna get mad at you because you didn't answer this the way that I think that you answered it. You didn't memorize what this acronym meant. Oh no. Um,
yeah.
we can goof around and we can laugh at mistakes. And to me, it again
Yeah.
brings down the defenses. If I can laugh at, hey, like I did this thing and it was a horrible, it worked out terribly.
Yeah.
That's gonna happen. It is just part of our job, unfortunately, is kind of throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. And sometimes it's gonna go bad. And having the humility and the play space that we can be like, okay, that did not go well. It's not go as I expected. It doesn't mean I'm a bad clinician. All right, what do I do next? And how do I be able to create an environment where we can actually look at these things rather than, right now the incentive system is, well, hide it. Why would I tell my supervisor, especially if they're not like an open person, why would I tell them about this really uncomfortable mistake that I made if I know that that's going to cause me a consequence? Unless I'm a very like motivated, maybe masochistic person to get that feedback, it doesn't. I want to incentivize the higher likelihood that we're going to have these types of fruitful conversations.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what you're saying, a lot of people will miss probably at least a half dozen things you just said. And just to highlight a couple of them,
Yeah.
because, you know, I don't want this conversation to come off like the profession is screwed, in my opinion,
Yeah.
because I genuinely see a lot of people trying to do things correctly. Like, I think there's a giant spectrum of people who are trying really hard to be good supervisors and play and let people develop. So I don't think it's like, there's the anti woke narrative therapy is gay and stupid and
Yep.
dumb and it's killing everyone. And no, I don't think either of us are Matt Walsh.
No.
And so what I would say is, my experience in at least Southern California and talking to people all over the country, I have a lot of friends like yourself all over the country who, you know, they come from maybe okay programs or even good programs, but, maybe supervision wasn't great or was okay. And so I think there's a diversity, there's like a mix of quality out there. And just to use my university as an example, I have said this a number of times on Twitter and I think on podcasts, but I feel very lucky. I feel genuinely very lucky. It's not like I did something amazing to make this place this way. It's like all happenstance. A number of my colleagues are just like us. They're very reasonable people. They come from very different backgrounds. One of them is very act, another one's kind of an old school behaviorist, right? And then they just hired a new psychodynamic person I get to do a practicum track with,
Cool.
which is a lot of fun. And so, like, there's a really interesting diversity of people there. And all of them, I think, are generally aware of what you and I are saying. They're aware that play is useful in supervision, they're aware that play is useful in development of your professional identity as an intern. And we get to have these conversations, and it's not forbidden to talk about professionalism differently than the benchmark compliance perspective. We have that at our university because we have to, obviously.
Mm.
If you sit in a faculty meeting with these people, they talk about that, but they're all very reasonable. They're all like, this person's figuring it out. What can we do? How can we help
Sure.
them? How can we support them? It's not the Stasi or the SS like, oh, you're not complying with our rules. We're going to get you expelled from the program. Like, I think there's a lot of grace in my program, to be honest. And so I think I'm very lucky and I get to play a role in maintaining that ecosystem of different types of clinicians from different backgrounds, but we have similar shared values, which is play and understanding and grace and kind of trying to see things in developmentally appropriate
Yeah.
ways as opposed to expecting them to be 20-year seasoned people who are
Makes no sense.
stuffy or some stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think there's a for people who listen to this, there's a spectrum out there of people who are trying their best or aware or unaware. And a lot of my colleagues are actually very aware of their stuff and they're doing their best to just kind of navigate the world with their differences. A couple of my colleagues I text on a regular basis and we talk about this stuff that you and I are talking about. And I think it allows it to be this ecosystem of very different people who are capable of doing very different types of work because their personalities and their baggage are all very different. and we're collaborators. We're not competitive. We joke around because there's like the psychodynamic track versus the
Sure.
act track and stuff like that, but it's all fun and games, right? And so like we're actual collaborators. And I think if we could, I wish we could take the spirit of what I get to work in and just duplicate it across programs. That'd be so cool because I think that that would just help a lot of the problem you and I are talking about.
I always really wonder. I'm like, is this just like an internet issue? Because my experience is very similar. It's like everyone that I work with in real life, super reasonable. They're smart.
Yeah.
Like they're all like just kind of doing their own thing,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot to like. And I think what you mentioned is a really important caveat is that there are a wide range of things that are happening. There are the kind of
Mm,
bullshit Instagram therapists that are just putting out nice fluffy little things, and it's kind of causing some problems. And there's a whole bunch of really serious people that are taking this extremely seriously and doing their best to do this. And it's
yeah.
important not to over fixate on any one of these groups and just so one thing I noticed is like my idea is I want to make things better. My
Mm.
observation is that when I say that, a lot of people hear that as you're bad or I'm bad, and it's like, well, I'm not even talking about you. I just want to. Because I think there is room for improvement, and to me, I always want to be working on improving the thing that I'm doing because that's what I find fun in life. Whether it is playing an instrument, playing a video game, I want to get good at the thing. That's what I
Yeah.
enjoy, and so I want to
Yeah.
continue that pursuit in my career. But often it is heard as I'm not good enough by the person that is hearing these. I want to tell you a funny little thing that I've been wanting to tell you. Um,
Yeah.
so about like 2 years ago on Twitter, I used to follow you, and this was when I was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I was just getting into private practice, and
Okay.
I worked in special education for like 10 years before that, and which is a very
Oh, okay.
different situation than going and doing
Yeah.
like psychotherapy in a private practice. So I was
Yeah.
new, and
Yeah. Yeah.
this is always where I wanted to go. Like this is I'm weird from a kid's. From being a kid, that's the only thing I ever wanted to do was be a private practice psychotherapist.
Okay.
So I finally get there, and you know how you have like on Twitter, your kick right now is like sleep, movement, all of this. You had a different thing back then. I forget exactly what it was, but it's pretty much like we need less therapists and therapy sucks. And I had to unfollow you because I was like, I can't tolerate this. Um, and so, but this is I'm bringing this up as your conversation of like, people are in different places at different times, and I think as you and I
Yeah.
now kind of where we are, we have to be cautious to be like, I don't want to discourage someone by saying, hey,
Sure.
you all suck, and like we need to and because things do suck, but it's, hey, how do we improve things? And I really like the conceptualization you had before of attraction. I want to attract people to what I'm doing rather than to say you're not good enough to do what I'm doing and you need to like jump over a hoop. And I think that is a really useful thing of how do I just do good things and be like, who wants to come along with me? Because that's really my goal. Like to me, the joy of supervision is I've done this long enough where I have people that have been my supervisees, graduated or not graduated, but taken their test, gotten their license, and now they're my colleague. And what a wonderful experience that is to like go with
Mm-hmm.
someone from on that journey with them and watch them do
Mm-hmm.
this. And I want to pull as many people along with me as I can. If you're like, hey, this is what I'm doing, and if you like this, like I want you on my side. And I think we need to build coalitions much more and unify much more than we do. It's often, again, I'm in this box, the psychoanalytic or the ACT or the CBT, whatever. It drives me fucking insane because I think you and I, again,
Mm-hmm.
nothing I think you and I tend to agree on is that like it's all kind
Mm-hmm.
of the same shit, but using different
Mm-hmm.
metaphors and different labels for the same phenomena. And I don't know why we're fighting over it rather than how can we unify on these things and bring everyone along for this ride?
Yeah, I think we should try to encourage people to live in a niche that works for them. And so if you're not a psychoanalyst,
Great.
then don't live this psychoanalytic life and don't have a practice that way. If you're an ACT therapist, because that's what fits your values and your personality and your level of development and all that stuff, great. Like I genuinely, sincerely believe in like the ecosystem metaphor, right? We are all very different types of people. And because we're all different types of people, we all serve different purposes. And the idea that everyone should be a Freudian or a self-psych analyst or an object relations person or an ACT person or a behaviorist or a cognitive therapist or whatever. Like I think that's all completely silly because it's pretending that all suffering is the same and all suffering responds to the same like interventions and personalities, which just couldn't be further from the truth. And so I guess one place that you and I differ still, and it is speaking directly to this old version of me that you couldn't stand is
I had to unfollow. It was fucking me
yeah,
up.
and that's fair enough, and it's probably fucking you up for a very good reason would be
Yeah,
my guess.
probably.
And and uh, I still kind of believe what I'm doing as like a very gentle terrorist de-radicalizer, right? So the American Psychological Association did especially in the years following the Iraq War, right?
Okay.
So like mid 2000s, early 2010s, teens, they put out a lot of interesting research about what it was like to de-radicalize fundamentalist Islamist terrorists from the Middle East or whatever,
All right.
because they had a bunch of them held captive, obviously, and the APA helped create the torture programs and the interrogation programs. And so they were studying how they de-radicalize people and help them become more, you know, anti extremist, essentially. And kind of, not quite fully tongue in cheek, that's what I believe that I'm doing to some degree on Twitter and in my professional life as a professor, a consultant, and a supervisor. Is I really am trying to de radicalize people who have, I think, radical beliefs about themselves such that they need to help people. I really
Mm.
am genuinely not in a cynical or pessimistic way. So I'm trying to state this very clearly and unemotionally. I'm trying to help people get out of the profession if I can. And the reason is because, as I've said many times on Twitter, I genuinely believe that there are a variety of unmet needs that people have that drive them to the profession. And if they actually had a full relationship with all of those unmet needs, they probably wouldn't be as interested in clinical work. And I'm not saying that you're wildly mentally ill and that's why you want to be a therapist, just so we're clear. I'm trying to be a little more
Yeah.
gray and nuanced about it because again, I think there are different personalities with different issues. So my genuine, non-cynical, non-pessimistic goal is to find the people that are more normies, honestly, and help them find other work, honestly, by just being an example of what it is to be a not normie and also talking honestly about all the reasons why people come into the profession that aren't good for them and how the profession itself is not good for people.
Yeah, and so one of the things I'll tell you, like one of my goals is try to use myself as an example of what you're talking about. So like what you just described is 100% why I got into the field. Like it is 100% I can trace it back to my childhood. I can trace it back to a single conversation with my mother, who was quite mentally ill, essentially telling me listening to her was very helpful and how that
Yeah.
produced a closeness with her that I had never gotten anywhere else. And so I can trace my whole life and see that this profession has given me such it's filled a need. It absolutely filled a need. And as I have, let's say, in my own psychotherapy in my own life, let's say gotten healthier, I would say that need is much less, and I'm actually much better at my job. But
Mm.
that like what you described, like that drive, like I have to help this person. I feel so much less. I'm now like, so if one of my patients like they do something that harms themselves, like oh, that's kind of a them problem. I'm here to help provide what I can provide in the 50 minutes or so that I meet with you. If you go out in your life, I don't want you to obviously do harmful things. I that will like I care about you, and at the same time, I don't feel responsible anymore. And that would be how I would describe how my previous I felt responsible as if I had
Mm.
to take care of this person rather than well, I'm performing a function for you for this 50 minutes. I'm going to do that as damn well as I can. But after you
Mm.
leave here, it's on you. You got to go figure it out. And it is shit absolutely as I have become more aware of what I brought and why I was attracted to this field. I think I have gotten better at it, and it's honestly been more enjoyable. It's not so much like, oh my god, if this person doesn't get better, that means I'm a bad person, and because that is kind of how my thought process was early on in my career. So I want to be very open with I am no exception to the things that you and I are talking about. These forces I see within myself constantly. I've just gotten to a point where we were using the word shame. I don't feel ashamed of admitting this thing. I don't like. I think that some people might
Mm.
feel ashamed that to say this out
Mm.
loud. Whereas it's like I find it actually fascinating, and I also think that I can leverage this to my benefit. That I still kind of have that drive to help people. It makes me really happy. It gets me excited and energized, but that isn't all life is. And to like
Yeah.
have a limit on that is, I think, very, very important.
Yeah, I think recognizing the kind of dynamic you just described with yourself and your mom and how you got here is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say I'm trying to de-radicalize
Yeah.
terrorists. Like, I genuinely believe that there are different personalities with different baggage, and depending upon the combination of personalities and baggage and culture, you're going to have a stronger or less strong need to quote unquote help people and understand people and
Oh yeah.
feel special with people and all these things. And so I believe genuinely there's like three buckets of people who do clinical work. Bucket number one are the people who are, second, third standard deviation out types who probably are personality disordered to some degree, who probably will never leave the profession because it really is serving some genuine narcissistic, borderline, psychopathic thing of theirs. And then I think there's bucket two, which is a moderately larger bucket, who is maybe organized differently, but isn't necessarily disordered in some way, shape, or form. And I think we could, well, at least I'll speak for myself. I think if they just had the right kinds of conversations where they could understand their differences and their baggage and things like that, they probably would do something else. That would
Mm,
be my hope.
okay.
And then bucket three are people who are just really naive. There's a segment of the clinical population who are just, they're not very smart and they're not very naive. And it's okay to not be very smart. God, I kind of wish I were. And I genuinely believe that those people are going to be gurus and coaches, and
Mm,
they're gonna they're gonna be they're gonna be like AI therapists. They're gonna be the parrots that just say what they need to say, and they're gonna live their life, and they're not going to actually have a particularly deep or special understanding of themselves. They're just gonna kind of like float throughout existence because they're not particularly bright and they're not particularly insightful. And I think that's probably 20 to 30% of people in the profession. And I think they'll probably stay in the profession, but those people probably shouldn't be in the profession to begin with. That's just me.
so wait. But given this thought, so bucket one is people with like personality level disorders in here. Bucket two is like you're all right, but like you're probably I want you to get out of here. And bucket three is you're the naive guru. And you're trying to get bucket two out. That leaves us
Yeah.
with personality disorder and gurus.
Well, but think about it this way. But no, no, but think about it this way, right? So
Okay.
I'm just going to give a very simple comparison.
Okay.
So I don't know how robust this data is,
All right.
but like I think there's a pretty strong trend in the literature. If you look at the personality styles of neurosurgeons, they tend to be not particularly empathic. They tend to score very low
Okay.
on traits like empathy. And if you think about it, the guy who's just opened up my brain, I don't want him to have lots of strong
Sure.
feelings about me because I don't want him to have a panic attack when a little thing goes wrong and worry about me. I want him to be like a psychopath who is willing to like figure it out and like save my life, right?
Hmm.
I want the pilot to be a narcissist. I want my airline pilot to be the biggest fucking narcissist on the planet because he's gonna go figure things out and he wants to look good and save everyone on the plane.
Mm.
Like I want him to be kind of sick, right? I want him to be smart and kind of sick in that way. And so I think there's a subset of people who are excellent therapists because they're kind of sick, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So I'm not saying that these people are bad because they're built differently. And I'm not saying that about any of the three buckets, by the way. I'm just trying to observe nature, kind of like
Sure.
Darwin would.
No,
You know
I
what I
was just,
mean?
I think I'm more joking that you're trying to get these people out of the bucket that would seem to be the most effective clinicians. But at a certain point, they
I
did.
I doubt it. I doubt it. I doubt that the more normie types are actually the best clinicians. I bet that they're the most compliant clinicians,
Mm.
but they probably would have a much more fulfilling life doing something else. Probably. I can't
Yeah,
say
sure,
because I don't
sure.
know everybody,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like, you know,
No, and I'm kind of joking about it, but it seems like there's a real like, how do you it? There's never, it's like a balancing. Like we have to balance like how crazy you are in the field, and like there's like an optimal amount of crazy to be a therapist. Um,
well, but look at all the greats though. Look at
yeah,
all the ones that we have training videos from. You got Jay Haley and Mnuchin, and you've got Albert Ellis and Fritz Perls and all these people who are fucking insane. Like none of them are good people. Not a one of them. Carl Jung was a terrible person. Freud's a terrible person. Klein was a terrible person. Watson, the founder of behaviorism, was a terrible person. Like all of the worst people were some of the best therapists and the most inventive and catalyzing and scandalous but useful,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And so I think there's a good reason to be kind of screwed up,
Yeah.
but maybe have a good relationship with it. You know what I mean?
Well, it goes to your comment before of like I think you and I both I love diversity just in a different way than it's been talked about in the last 10 years. Like I always think of just like the easiest example of this to me is like an Elon Musk figure where everyone freaks out about everything he does. Like you don't get to be Elon Musk and be normal. Like that's not how this world works. You have to be thinking very differently than everyone else. And we get to benefit from people like that, but you have to. To me, one of the things that you need to give latitude for these people to be able to think in the ways that they do, obviously with limits, but it is so valuable to have people that are, outside of the norm and outthink very differently. And this kind of the buttoned up professional thing was, to me, it was like it stifled so much creativity. And just like you said, something you said earlier that I want to echo, which is I'm actually like super optimistic about the field right now. I think we're in like a better place than we've been in a long time. And there's so
Yeah.
many smart, effective people that are working towards improving things like in a way that I have not seen in my lifetime. So I'm actually
Hmm.
like super optimistic. And the people that are still pessimistic, I'm like, I'm confused. What are you looking at? Because I'm just seeing smart people building things like I've never seen before.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting types of people out there building new businesses
Yep.
and models, and I feel really good about that because I think those are the kind of screwed up people that I want building things. You know, like I don't want normies building things because I don't believe they're really capable of doing a good job of creating something useful long term. So I would say you should be optimistic. If you're actually paying attention to all of the data, you should be relatively optimistic. If you're just paying attention to your left wing or right wing culture war ideology thing, if you live in a little microcosm that you never get outside of, then you should be very pessimistic because the right wingers think wokeness is taking over all of grad school and it's all going to go to shit. And then the left wingers are like, oh my God, the conservatives are winning and people are being reasonable again and da 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 da, and misogyny. And it's like, I just think that people are a little more complicated than that. I think society is just a tad more complicated and fluid
Just
and
a little bit.
dynamic than that.
It's a little more
I mean,
complicated.
I mean, call me crazy. I just think that life is a little more complicated than some bullshit dynamics on Twitter, Fox
Yes.
News, CNN, or whatever. I just can't imagine, like, if you go to the coffee shop right now, some tragic thing is going to happen with regard to wokeness or anti-wokeness or whatever it is, especially as it relates to mental health. So I think the bigger problem that we should all be aware of is that we have a lot of financial incentives that are still very screwed up. But the best way to combat them is to create a lot of small businesses that succeed. My little private practice clinic is going to succeed because my business partner and I are both reasonable business partners, number one, but we have really attractive principles and
Hmm.
track records. And so we're going to succeed. There's a really small chance we won't, but I'm pretty sure we will. We're already making money. So my guess is that's going to continue
Hmm.
because we're trying to do something that's useful, not something that's flashy, you know? And I think so long as useful is out there in the ethos, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter if you're gay or trans. It doesn't matter if you're straight. It doesn't matter if you're white. None of that shit matters if you're being useful to a community of people, in my opinion. That's all interesting
Yeah,
and
sure.
sometimes helpful. I'm openly part of the LGBT community, and I'm aware of the fact that there are some people that relate to me easier because of that.
Sure.
And I'm happy for that. And I'm not trying to push that. It's just reality. And so I'm glad that I can be some kind of representative for one community that's useful. I'm glad about that. So I do appreciate diversity. And I think that there's a reasonable way to talk about it. And I
Hmm.
hope that people see that life is actually genuinely getting better, you
Yeah,
know?
it just is. I love this idea of just being useful because just to share one of my experiences. So when I worked in the schools, I was the only white person there. I was in right outside Washington D.C. And what I was very afraid was I grew up in a very white environment, and I was like, well, these people are going to look at me and be like, what the hell does this guy have to offer me? And what I learned very quickly is we'll just be useful. And then they don't give a shit about anything else. Nothing matters if I provide something that is useful, if I'm consistent, helpful, whatever it may be. Didn't really matter. It was, oh, this person saw me as useful, and then that was it. And all of these little petty, I call them petty, and I understand in some domains that they'll probably be actually very important. But on day-to-day life, it actually tends to not really actually matter that much. You said if you go outside, where there's not like race wars in the streets, like there's not like gender battles everywhere. It's not doesn't really matter very often. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it matters a lot. But we over fixate on these things rather than and try to like look as if we're useful rather than just be useful. Just be useful, and that's and to me is always it is it is just hard. It's hard to be useful. Takes a lot of work. Takes a lot of effort. It's very easy to criticize, divide people up, point out what's different. I actually find that to be like cheap and easy work that
Yeah.
we've fixated on for the last 15 years or so, and it's not done us a whole lot of good. And that's why I'm optimistic
Mm,
right now is that I see people putting more effort into creating, and it's really hard to create because, as you said, there's a risk of failure. Even if you think you're going to succeed, there's a risk of failure. You have to put
yeah.
time and effort into something. You have to deal
Yeah.
with your failures because you're going to fuck up along the way. Like you're just going to make mistakes, and for most people that's an uncomfortable experience. And so it's just harder to do that, I think, very often.
I think it's hard to create a business, but also I think it's hard to advertise yourself as useful
Mm,
because I think, like you said, people want to look useful because they want to be accepted. And I have no problem with that. I think wanting to be accepted
sure.
is totally valuable. And I just want to encourage everyone who's in the profession who listens to this to think about like, what are the different types of ways in which you are useful? And if you're taking stuff personally and struggling, maybe you should think about why that is, you know? Because you can still be useful and maybe do less or do something different,
Yeah, and you don't have to
you
do
know?
everything. Like as you said, I think this ecosystem idea is really important because I'm a certain type of therapist for a certain type of person, and I am just not for some people. It's always fascinating to me because it feels like I attract those people. Just I don't have to do anything. The people that end up in my office tend to be the people that I work well with, and so I think there's again just being aware that this is gonna happen, and if you are honest about what you are doing, you actually just tend to attract the people that want the thing that you have. And as long as you
Hmm.
can just be aware of this thing of like, hey, I provide this thing. If you want it, you can come over to my office and you can pay me some
Yeah.
money and I'll give you that thing.
Yeah.
But as often there's this narcissism. I want to be everything for everyone and garner everyone's
Mm,
attention. It's like
mm.
even if I get my little slice of the pie, I've realized like that's enough attention. I get enough of that special feeling by just doing my job in my little narrow niche well enough.
Hmm. Good. I'm
Yeah.
glad you figured that out. Yeah.
Well, since I'm trying to be cognizant of time, well, why don't we wrap this up here today? I really appreciate you coming on, sharing this perspective. I think this topic conversation of just what is our profession doing, where are we going, is an important thing to continue to articulate. Because so much of this gets lost in our own little minds, and I think we just need to talk to each other a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, I agree.
No, pleasure. And anything you want to promote your podcast, Twitter, where to find you?
Oh, yeah, yeah. If anyone wants to come chat or play around with me, I'm on Twitter, and my handle is at Alobha Patrick at ALOBHAPATRICK. And I have a weekly podcast on Saturdays, usually around 3:30 Pacific, and it's called Unshrink Me.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. We'll talk to you again soon.